Have you ever felt your body tense slightly just from hearing the doorbell ring? Someone wants to come in, to visit, to talk. Yet inside you feel uncomfortable, an inner resistance, a deep impulse to say no. You do not hate people, and you are not angry at the world. But, honestly speaking, you simply do not like having guests come to your home. Many people are quick to label this as coldness, as being hard to approach, as a lack of friendliness. But Carl Jung viewed this phenomenon from a different angle. He believed that such small, subtle reactions are often signals of the inner life speaking up, not to push others away, but to protect a deeper part within you, the part that is most easily disturbed. The fact that you do not like having visitors sometimes says nothing about other people at all, but instead reveals something about your relationship with your own inner world. With silence, with boundaries, with the need to be yourself, without performing, without reacting, without maintaining an image. In this video, we will take a deeper look at this seemingly ordinary experience through 9 insights from the perspective of the great philosopher Carl Jung, to understand why some people simply do not like having guests at home, and why this is not only natural but may also be a sign of a valuable inner psychological process. So stay with us until the end of the video, because if you have ever felt guilty for wanting to be alone, today you may realize that this has far more to do with your psychological development than with a flaw in your personality. Number 1. Home is where you lower your guard. Some feelings are very difficult to name. They are not strong enough to become clearly uncomfortable, yet not light enough to be ignored. For example, the moment someone steps into your home and you suddenly feel your body tense slightly. Not because they did anything wrong, not because you dislike them, and not because you are being impolite. It is simply that something inside you has just been disturbed, very subtly, but enough for you to no longer feel as comfortable as you did a few minutes earlier. You still smile. You still greet them. You still make tea, offer water, and talk like a normal person. But somewhere inside, a thin layer of defense has automatically been raised. No one asked for it. No one gave an order. It happened so quickly that you only notice it once your body has already shifted states. Your shoulders lift slightly. Your breathing becomes shallower. Your attention is no longer as relaxed as when you are alone. And even if you do not want to admit it, you begin to wish for the visit to end. Strangely, you do not see yourself as bad or selfish in that moment. You simply feel tired. A kind of fatigue that simmers quietly. Not sharp, not explosive, but lingering. And precisely because it is so mild and so familiar, you often dismiss it. You tell yourself, I'm probably just sensitive. Maybe I'm not in the mood today. Maybe I'm overthinking. And then you continue repeating that familiar cycle every time someone enters your space. If you look closely, you will notice how honestly your body reacts. You feel a slight tension, as if you have been holding a posture for too long. You begin to hope the visit will end soon, even though no conflict has occurred. And when the door finally closes, when the space returns to its original state, you exhale. Not the kind of exhale that comes after an unpleasant conversation, but the kind that feels like setting down an invisible burden. A feeling that is very familiar, very personal, and very difficult to explain to others. This does not happen because you dislike people. In fact, many people who feel this way are often excellent listeners, very sensitive in communication, and quite attentive to the emotions of others. The issue is not the guest. The issue is the space. Or more precisely, the meaning that space holds for you. In-depth psychology. Carl Jung did not see the house as merely a physical place. He regarded it as an important psychological symbol, representing the core of the self. Not the social self, not the image you present to the outside world, but the place where you do not need to prove anything, the place where you can let go, and your unconscious knows this very well. Jung once wrote, "The house is a symbol of the psyche." In this understanding, the house is the soul's given form. Every room, every small corner, corresponds to an inner state. And most importantly, the unconscious perceives it as an absolutely safe zone, not safe in the sense that there is no danger, but safe because you do not need to be on guard. When you are alone at home, you do not need to choose your words. You do not need to manage your facial expressions. You do not need to observe anyone's reactions. You can be silent without being misunderstood. You can be tired without having to explain. You can be yourself in the rawest way, unpolished for acceptability. This is one of the rare moments in the day when your nervous system is allowed to drop to its lowest level. And then, when someone enters that space, even if they are close to you, even if they are kind, your unconscious still registers it as a slight intrusion. Not an intrusion that is threatening, but an intrusion into a zone that does not require defense. And so, the natural response is to rebuild that defense, quietly, without drama. Just a very subtle shift from letting go to holding on. If you have ever felt this, try imagining a very simple image, like when you have just taken off your shoes, lie down on the couch, and relax your whole body after a long day. And at that exact moment, someone asks you to stand up, straighten your clothes, smile, and continue being polite for a little while longer. No one has done anything wrong. But your body knows it has just been pulled out of a state of rest, and the discomfort arises not because of the other person, but because of that interruption. This explains why you may feel perfectly fine meeting people outside, at a cafe, at work, in social spaces, yet become especially sensitive when someone comes to your home. Outside, you are already in role. You are already wearing the social layer. But at home, you are not prepared for that. And having to put that layer back on, even briefly, is enough to exhaust you. Carl Jung once wrote a line worth reflecting on. The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases. Not everyone needs the same level of openness to the world. Not everyone can live comfortably with their personal boundaries being constantly disturbed. For some people, home is not just a place to live, it is where they recover, and any interruption, no matter how small, directly affects their inner balance. Perhaps that is why you feel you are truly yourself only when you are alone at home, not because you dislike anyone, but because only then do you not need to be on guard. You do not need to monitor others' reactions. You do not need to keep pace with anyone but yourself. And that is a very real psychological need, not selfishness. So what does this say about your soul? It suggests that you have fairly clear inner boundaries, even if you have not yet named them. You need a space where you are not required to become any version other than yourself. And when that space is intruded upon, even slightly, your body and emotions speak up before your rational mind can intervene. Have you ever wondered why you feel noticeably more at ease when you are alone at home? Why just a few hours of quiet can make you feel like you have returned to yourself? And why the presence of others, even without conflict, still makes you feel like you have to tense up a little? If so, you may be listening to the right signals from within, rather than being too sensitive, as you may have thought. The solution here is not to shut everyone out, nor is it to force yourself to be more open to satisfy social expectations. What matters more is discernment, choosing who is allowed to enter this space, choosing when you have enough energy to open the door, and most importantly, allowing yourself not to open the door just out of politeness. Not everyone needs to have access to you at your most unguarded state. Not everyone needs to witness you when you are resting, recovering, or feeling weak. Protecting your private space does not make you cold. It simply shows that you understand what you need to remain whole. Because when you look deeper, protecting your home is not just about protecting a physical space. It is about protecting the place where you do not have to strain, where you do not have to be on guard, where you are allowed to be yourself without explanation. And if you do not like having guests over, perhaps that is not a sign of withdrawal, but a very gentle reminder from your soul saying, "This is where I need to be at peace." In the next part, we will look at another layer, a little deeper, no longer about space, but about the image you have to maintain when others are there, and why that, more than anything else, is what truly exhausts you. Number 2, you are tired of having to maintain an image, and sometimes that discomfort does not come from the guest, but from yourself, from a very small moment when you automatically adjust your voice, lowering it or raising it slightly from its natural tone. From the way you pay attention to your facial expression, choose your words carefully, and control your gestures, even while standing in your own home. No one asks you to do this. No one forces you. But your body has grown accustomed to stepping into a role whenever someone else is present. You still converse. You remain polite. You keep the rhythm going. But the initial sense of ease is gone. You no longer speak from a natural stream of thought, but according to what should be said. You no longer stay silent when you want to be silent, but search for a social phrase to fill the gap. And even if you do not realize it in the moment, each of these small adjustments is slowly draining your energy. If you look closely, you will notice how quickly your behavior changes. Your natural voice is adjusted to sound more pleasant. A smile appears at the right time, even when inside you no longer have the energy to smile. You nod, respond, and maintain presence, but your mind has already begun drifting elsewhere. And when the guest leaves, instead of feeling happy about the meeting, you feel a quiet irritation. Not irritation toward them, but toward yourself, for having tried for too long. This kind of fatigue is not loud. It does not erupt into conflict. It lies still, accumulates, and only reveals itself when you are finally alone. When the door closes, you sink into a chair and realize that you have just finished playing a role. No one applauds, no one acknowledges it, but your body knows very clearly that it has been working continuously. Carl Jung called this state the persona. He described it as the mask people use to adapt to society, a layer that is necessary for us to work, communicate, and exist in the shared world. But Jung also warned that the persona consumes a great deal of energy when we mistake it for our true self. He wrote, "The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself, as well as others, think one is." The issue is not whether you have a persona or not. Everyone does. The issue is where you wear it, and for how long. When the persona appears in public spaces, it helps you integrate. But when you have to wear it inside your own home, the place where you are supposed to remove all roles, exhaustion begins to accumulate very quickly. This explains why you can meet, talk, and work all day outside and still feel fine. Yet, the moment guests come to your home, you feel yourself running out of energy. Not because of the number of people, not because of the content of the conversation, but because you are performing in the very place where you hope to rest. Imagine the feeling of playing a role you know very well. You know the lines. You know how to respond. You do it well. The difference is that this stage is set right in your living room. There is no backstage to retreat to. There is no curtain call where you can finally breathe. You are both the actor and the one who cleans up after the performance. And that is far more exhausting than you might expect. You may have noticed this through very small details. You find yourself talking more than necessary. You explain things that do not really need explanation. You maintain an image of being pleasant, friendly, stable, even when inside, you only want quiet. And when the visit ends, you do not want to do anything else. Not read, not watching a movie, not talk. You just want silence. Jung once wrote, "A man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them." Applied to daily life, this does not refer only to intense emotions, but also to the roles we are forced to maintain. If you continuously suppress your need to be yourself, just to preserve an acceptable image, exhaustion will find its way back in the form of irritability, distance, or withdrawal. Perhaps this is why you do not like having guests over, not because you dislike the presence of others, but because you do not want to maintain an image within your own private space. You do not want to choose your words. You do not want to smile when you no longer have the energy. You do not want to keep being okay. Have you ever noticed that you perform the most when hosting guests? Are you more careful, more guarded, and more self-controlled than when you are alone? And that it is this very self-control that exhausts you, not the person in front of you? What does this say about your soul? It suggests that you are highly aware of image, deeply attentive to how others feel, and therefore easily drained when you have to maintain a role for too long. Your soul needs a place that does not require you to perform, a place where you are not being watched, not being evaluated, and not expected to meet any standard at all. The solution here is not to become cold or impolite, nor is it to cut off all connections. Something far more practical is to reduce the duration, not the kindness. You can choose shorter visits. You can take the initiative to end a meeting when you feel yourself starting to tense up. You can allow yourself not to host guests on days when your energy is already depleted. Kindness is not measured by how long you endure. It is measured by sincerity. And sometimes, shortening a visit is precisely how you protect that sincerity. Because when you are too tired, every smile becomes an obligation, and every word loses its life. Jung emphasized that a person cannot live healthily if they exist only within a single role. He wrote, "The acceptance of oneself is the essence of the whole moral problem and the epitome of a whole outlook on life. When you allow yourself to remove the image in your private space, you are doing exactly what your soul needs, not violating any standard. So if you recognize that you are tired of having to maintain an image when guests come to your home, see it as a signal, not a flaw. A signal that you need more space to be yourself. A signal that friendliness does not always equal truth. Being friendly is not always the same as being true to yourself, and sometimes, the fact that you do not like having guests over is simply your soul saying, 'Here, I want to rest from every role.'" In the next part, we will look at another layer, even more subtle, when you are sensitive to other people's energy, and why their mere presence can be enough to exhaust you. Number 3. You are sensitive to other people's energy. There are people who do nothing wrong. They do not say anything inappropriate. They are not rude, not intrusive, not overtly crossing boundaries. Yet after they have been there for a while, you begin to feel your head grow heavy. The space seems to shrink. Your thoughts become tangled. And inside you, a very specific, very real desire appears. The hardest part about this is that you do not know how to explain the feeling, because from the outside, there seems to be no reason to feel uncomfortable. The conversation is normal. The other person's attitude is fine. There is no conflict, no tension, but your body reacts. And that reaction does not need a logical reason in order to exist. You begin to feel restless, not to the point of being unable to sit still, but enough that you can no longer fully focus on the conversation. You are listening, but you are not truly there anymore. A part of you is observing, pulling inward, as if it needs to create distance to avoid overload. And when the meeting ends, what you need most is not another conversation, but silence. A stretch of quiet long enough for you to return to yourself. This feeling often makes you doubt yourself. You wonder whether you are too sensitive, whether you are imagining something that is not really there. But if you look closely, you will see that this is not a random reaction. It has a pattern. It repeats itself, and it always appears after certain kinds of contact. Carl Jung once wrote, "The unconscious sees before the conscious." The unconscious senses things before the conscious mind can name them. This is especially true for people with a more refined capacity for perception. You do not need to analyze in order to know that you are overloaded. Your body signals it first. The feeling comes before the explanation. Only afterward does the rational mind begin searching for reasons. Some people have thinner energetic boundaries than others. That does not mean they are weak. It simply means they take in more signals within the same amount of time. Tone of voice, eye contact, breathing rhythms, unspoken emotions of the person in front of them, all of it is registered, even without any deliberate effort. And when too many signals come in at once, your nervous system becomes tired. Imagine a small room, nothing special about it. When there are only a few people inside, everything feels fine. The air is breathable, the sound level is manageable. But as more people enter, even if no one speaks louder and no one behaves differently, the space begins to feel suffocating. Not because anyone is at fault, but because the room was not designed to hold that much at once. Your psychology works in a similar way. You may have noticed this through very ordinary details. After guests leave, you do not want to turn on music. You do not want to watch anything. After, too, you do not want to talk to anyone else, not even people close to you. You just want silence. Sometimes that means sitting still. Sometimes it means taking a long shower. Sometimes it means lying down and doing nothing at all, not because you are sad, but because you need to release. Jung emphasized that the unconscious does not only store repressed material, but also receives and processes subtle influences from the environment. He wrote, "The unconscious reacts to everything that consciousness does not see. While your conscious mind is busy maintaining a conversation, your unconscious is still working, taking in every small signal you do not have time to notice. And when the meeting ends, everything that has been absorbed needs time to settle. This explains why you do not like having guests over, even though you do not dislike them. Your home, for you, is not just a place to live. It is where your nervous system slows down. When someone enters that space, the flow of energy in the room changes. And if you are sensitive, you feel that change very clearly, even if you cannot put it into words. Have you ever noticed that not everyone makes you feel this way? There are people you can be with for hours and still feel comfortable. And there are others who only need to stay for a short while before you feel the need to withdraw. This says nothing about their value as people. It simply means that the energetic compatibility between two individuals is different. And it is precisely for this reason that you need time alone after social contact, not to avoid others, but to rebalance, to allow your nervous system to rest. To give the signals you have absorbed time to be processed and settle. Without this recovery space, fatigue accumulates, and you may begin to feel irritable, distant, or withdrawn, without understanding why. Have you experienced this before? After hosting guests, you find yourself unable to do anything else, even though earlier you thought you still had time and energy? Have you ever needed to be alone just to release, without knowing how to explain it to anyone? If so, it is very likely that you are not difficult. You are simply listening accurately to the needs of your nervous system. The solution here is not to force yourself to become numb, nor is it to avoid all contact. A far more realistic approach is to create recovery space. To know in advance that after hosting guests, you will need a period of quiet. To intentionally arrange your time so you do not have to move straight into another social activity. To allow yourself not to reply to messages immediately. To allow yourself to be still. That recovery space is not a luxury. It is a necessary condition for long-term balance. When you respect this need, you will find yourself less irritable, less exhausted, and less drained after each interaction. When you consistently ignore it, you may start associating that exhaustion with the people around you, and that is unfair to both sides. Carl Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." In this case, the darkness is not something negative. It is the sensitive part of you that you were never taught how to respect. When you begin to face it directly, without judgment or denial, you will understand why you need things that others may not. So what does your sensitivity to other people's energy say about your soul? It shows that you have the capacity to feel deeply, to take in a great deal, and therefore, you need more space to self-regulate. You are not weak, you are not difficult, you are simply not designed to keep the door open continuously without time to close it again. Sensitivity is not a flaw that needs fixing. It is a form of deep perception that needs care. And if you do not like having guests over, it may not be because you dislike the presence of others, but because you understand very clearly how much you need in order to maintain inner balance. In the next part, we will go one layer deeper. Not just external energy, but an inner part of you that wants to withdraw, not to escape, but to listen to yourself. If you have made it this far, thank you for taking the time to listen and to stay with yourself a little longer. If any of this resonated with you, consider liking or sharing this video with someone you think might also need to slow their breathing down. Sometimes, simply knowing that someone else feels the same way is enough to feel lighter. And now, we will move on to the next sign, where you will better understand why an inner urge to withdraw appears when guests want to come to your home, not to disappear, but to grow. Number 4. Inside you, there is a part that wants to withdraw. Carl Jung believed that the urge to withdraw is rarely a sign of weakness. On the contrary, it often appears during periods of transition, when an old layer no longer fits and a new one has not yet fully formed. The more you are in states like this, the more you realize that what you long for is not total isolation, but a temporary retreat, a closing of the door, and the ability to remain in a space that does not demand that you react or perform in any way. This feeling does not arrive suddenly. It accumulates very slowly. At first, you simply notice that you are no longer enthusiastic about conversations that used to feel familiar. You respond more briefly. You initiate less. You feel tired just thinking about having to explain, to update, to show up sufficiently. And then, you begin to want to close the door. Not to any specific person, but to the world in general, for a certain period of time. You avoid unnecessary interactions, not because you dislike others, but because you no longer have enough energy to maintain connections that are purely formal. You find yourself wanting to reduce words, to reduce appointments, to reduce interactions that always require extra recovery time afterward. And this often leaves you confused, because you were not like this before. Or at least, you did not notice yourself being this way. In a society that values constant activity and continuous presence, the desire to withdraw is easily misunderstood. Others may think you are avoiding things, pulling away, or that something is wrong with you. And you may begin to wonder whether you are becoming distant or selfish. But if you look more deeply, this may not be escape at all, but a natural response of the psyche when it needs to be restructured. Carl Jung called this process individuation. He described it as the journey of returning to oneself, separating from externally imposed roles, expectations, and images, in order to gradually become who one truly is. Jung wrote, "Individuation means becoming a single, homogeneous being, and, insofar as individuality embraces our innermost, last, and incomparable uniqueness, it also implies becoming one's own self." The important point here is this: individuation does not happen in noise. It does not occur amid constant conversations or endless interactions. It requires space. It requires pauses. It requires stretches of silence long enough for you to hear something inside you changing. And that is why the urge to withdraw often appears when you are entering a new stage of maturity, even if, on the surface, nothing special seems to be happening. Think of a tree. No one expects it to bloom all year round. There are seasons when it must shed its leaves, stand still, and draw energy inward. Winter, from the outside, may look like death, but in reality, it is preparation. Without winter, there is no spring. The human psyche operates according to a similar rhythm. There are phases when you need to pull inward, not to disappear, but to regenerate. When you do not like having guests during such phases, it may be because the presence of others disrupts this natural retreat. Not because they are directly bothering you, but because you need a space without demands, without expectations, without continuous feedback. You need to be alone with thoughts that are not yet clear and emotions that have not yet been named. This often comes with very subtle changes in behavior. You prefer staying at home. You feel lighter when you do not have to go out. You breathe more easily when you do not have to host anyone. And when you are forced to interact too much, you feel drained faster than usual. This is not a sign that you are moving backward. It simply shows that you are at an inner crossroads. Jung once wrote a sentence worth reflecting on. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. Looking inward requires separating yourself from constant, external stimulation. And that cannot happen if you are always open, always available, always responding. In this context, the urge to withdraw is an invitation to return, not a rejection of the world. Are you in a phase where you need quiet? Do you feel that the most important questions in your life right now cannot be answered through conversation, but can only be heard in silence? And do you notice that each time you force yourself to function normally, you feel a little further away from yourself? If so, it is very likely that something inside you needs to be listened to, not by analyzing excessively, but by giving it space for thoughts to settle. space for emotions to be digested, space for what is still unclear to gradually take shape. The solution here is not to cut off all relationships or disappear from social life. That is neither necessary nor healthy. A more appropriate approach is selective withdrawal. You keep the important connections. You continue seeing the people who allow you to be yourself, but you permit yourself to step back from interactions that require you to strain, perform, or react more than you currently can. Selective withdrawal also means allowing yourself to say no without excessive explanation, allowing yourself to stay home without guilt, allowing yourself not to host guests for a period of time, not because you do not value them, but because you are valuing yourself. This requires honesty with others, but first and foremost, honesty with yourself. You need to ask, am I avoiding or am I caring? Am I running away or am I listening? The answer is often found in how you feel afterward. If, after withdrawing, you feel clearer, calmer, and more connected to yourself, then it is not retreat, it is progress. Carl Jung emphasized that psychological development is not linear. It has phases of moving outward and phases of moving inward. He wrote, "There is no linear evolution. There is only a circumambulation of the self. Your need to withdraw at this moment may simply be a necessary turn on that journey." So what does your dislike of having guests, at this stage, say about your soul? It shows that you are at a point where quiet matters more than presence, that you need fewer external voices in order to hear your inner voice more clearly, and that you are sensitive enough to recognize when you need to close the door, even if not everyone understands. Withdrawing at the right time is not giving up. It is preparation, a necessary silence before you return to the world as a clearer, steadier, and more authentic version of yourself. And if you are in that phase, allow yourself to slow down, not to lose anything, but to avoid losing yourself. In the next part, we will continue exploring another aspect of this withdrawal, when you begin learning how to set boundaries, not to push others away, but to keep the core within you intact. Number 5. You are learning how to set boundaries. And then, somewhere between the desire to connect and the need for quiet, you begin to hesitate each time you open the door. Not because you do not care about others, not because you are cold or distant, but because you are learning how to protect something very personal within yourself, something you used to overlook, something you used to sacrifice, just to keep everything okay. This hesitation is not loud. It does not arrive as a clear decision. It shows up as a very slight pause before you nod yes, a moment when you ask yourself, do I really want this? And what confuses you the most is that sometimes you do not, but you still say yes. There is a familiar inner struggle here. On one side is your personal need, the wish to be still, to rest, to stop giving for a while. On the other side is social obligation, the habit of making others comfortable, the fear of disappointing someone, upsetting them, or being seen as someone who has changed. You stand between these two poles, and in the past, you often chose others. But over time, the cost of that choice becomes clearer. Each time you say yes, while inside you feel no, you lose a bit of energy. Not much, not immediately, but it accumulates. And eventually, you reach a point where you no longer want to open the door at all, not because you dislike others, but because you have grown used to abandoning yourself. Carl Jung emphasized that psychological growth does not lie in leaning entirely to one side, but in the ability to hold and integrate opposing forces within. He wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." Learning to set boundaries carries this kind of pain as well. The pain of not making everyone completely satisfied. The pain of letting go of the image of being always agreeable. The pain of facing guilt, even when you have done nothing wrong. Boundaries are often misunderstood as rigidity, distance, or rejection. But in reality, boundaries emerge when you begin to take your own balance seriously, not by shutting everyone out, not by forcing yourself to let everyone in, but by recognizing that not every relationship requires the same level of access. Jung believed that wholeness does not come from cutting off parts of oneself, but from placing different parts in their proper place. He wrote, Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. Applied to everyday life, this means you do not have to choose between connection and quiet. You need to learn how both can coexist, in an order that fits you. And this is where boundaries begin to take shape, not through grand declarations, but through very small choices. You begin choosing to invite people who understand your rhythm of life. People who do not see your need for quiet as a personal offense. People who do not demand that you be cheerful all the time. You realize that when you are with them, you do not have to brace yourself. And when you do not have to brace yourself, you also do not need to withdraw so far. In contrast, with relationships that require you to constantly explain yourself, apologize for your needs, or open the door, even when you are already exhausted, you begin to slow down, not to punish anyone, but to ask yourself, is this relationship nourishing me, or is it gradually draining me? You may have experienced this feeling before. You hesitate before a very familiar invitation. There is no big enough reason to decline. But your body is tired, and inside your head, two voices speak at once. One says, just go and get it over with. The other says, I don't have the energy. And that exact moment, standing between those two voices, is where a boundary is being formed. Are you saying yes when inside you feel no? Do you notice that each time this happens, you leave your house feeling heavy and return feeling depleted? And do you ever wonder whether, if you keep going like this, that friendliness is still genuine, or if it has become merely a role you perform? Learning to set boundaries does not mean you will become selfish. It simply means you begin to treat your own needs as valid, that your exhaustion does not need justification, that your need for quiet is not a flaw that must be fixed. When you start respecting your needs, boundaries stop feeling like walls and begin to feel like doors with locks. And that lock is not meant to keep others out. It exists, so you have the right to choose when to open. Saying no, gently, without justification, without long explanations, is one way of doing this. You do not need to list all your reasons. You do not need to prove that you deserve rest. A simple, sincere sentence is often enough. And how the other person responds will tell you a great deal about the nature of that relationship. Carl Jung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." When you begin to set boundaries, relationships will inevitably change. Some become clearer and lighter, others become tense. But what matters is that you no longer have to trade yourself away to maintain superficial peace. Interestingly, when you set clearer boundaries, you are not only protecting yourself, you are also creating the conditions for real intimacy. Because only when you are allowed to be yourself, without bracing or performing, can connection deepen. Intimacy is not built on constant availability, but on being present in an authentic way. Boundaries also help you realize that not everyone needs to understand you, and you do not need to explain yourself to everyone. Some relationships can only exist if you make yourself smaller. And if that is the case, perhaps their existence is not worth the cost you keep paying. So what does it say about your soul when you do not like having guests at this stage of your life? It may mean that you are at a point of transition, a point where you are no longer willing to sacrifice quiet for surface-level harmony, a point where you are beginning to understand that to connect deeply, you first need to stand firmly within yourself. Boundaries do not make you more distant from others. They simply bring you closer to yourself. And from that place, the remaining relationships will either adjust naturally to fit or quietly fall away. Both outcomes are necessary. Because boundaries, in the end, are not a rejection of love. They are the condition that prevents love from becoming depletion. And if you are learning how to set boundaries, it is very likely that your soul is entering a new stage of maturity. One where you understand that real intimacy cannot exist if you are constantly leaving yourself behind. Number 6. You feel invaded when others stay too long. At first, everything feels fine. You make tea. You sit down. You talk. The atmosphere is not tense. Nothing is wrong. But then the conversation stretches longer than you can tolerate. That presence shows no sign of ending. and your body begins to react. Very subtly at first, then more clearly, even as your rational mind keeps persuading you that you should remain polite a little longer. You cannot pinpoint the exact moment when things start to feel off. You only know that you begin checking the clock more often. You grow restless. You no longer fully hear the story being told. Your smile comes more slowly. Your responses become shorter. A part of you is waiting. Not waiting for something interesting to happen, but waiting for everything to end. What makes you most uncomfortable is not the other person, but your own reaction. You ask yourself, why am I irritated over something so small? They didn't do anything wrong. Why am I being so petty? And that self-blame only makes the tension inside you tighten further. You lose patience, but you cannot explain why. You want it to end, but you do not dare to say so. You do not want to appear rude. You do not want to make anyone sad. You do not want to be judged as difficult, so you keep sitting there, while inside, the discomfort steadily grows, slowly but surely. Carl Jung once wrote, "The body is the shadow of the soul. The body always reflects what the soul has not yet managed to say." When a boundary is violated, even if it is only a boundary of time, your body will speak up before your rational mind can find an excuse. And this is especially true for people who are sensitive to personal space. The unconscious is extremely sensitive to time, not time as measured by a clock, but time as measured by the nervous system's capacity to endure. Each person has a different threshold. When someone's presence exceeds that threshold, the unconscious registers it as an intrusion, even if, on the surface, everything still seems perfectly reasonable. You may rationally think, they're just staying a little longer, but your body does not operate on rationality. It operates on balance. And when that balance is stretched too far, it reacts. Restlessness, fatigue, irritation, quiet resentment, not because of the other person, but because your boundary has been crossed. Jung emphasized that emotional reactions that seem irrational often come from unconscious limits that have not yet been made conscious. He wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. When you are unaware of your own time boundaries, you will repeatedly find yourself in the same uncomfortable situations and assume they are caused by circumstances, by others, or by your own difficult nature." Try imagining this. Someone sits on your bed. At first, it feels normal. Nothing is wrong. But the longer they stay, the more uncomfortable you become. Not because they are dirty, not because they are rude, but because a bed is a very private space, and that privacy has limits. When time stretches on, the sense of invasion appears, even if you say nothing. Your home is the same. For many people, a home is not just a place to receive guests. It is a place to slow down. A place where you do not need to stay in a social mode. When someone stays too long, that space is pulled into a different mode, for longer than you can sustain, and your body reacts to that prolongation. This explains why you may feel completely fine with a short visit, but exhausted with the same person if they stay longer. Not because your feelings toward them have changed, but because the duration has exceeded your capacity, and because you did not set a boundary from the beginning. You only realize this when it is already too late. Do you find that you are tired not because of the guest, but because they do not know when to leave, and that you also do not know how to say it without feeling guilty? Have you ever experienced wanting the visit to end while simultaneously blaming yourself for wanting it to end? Here, the issue is not politeness. It is the absence of a clear time frame. When there is no frame, you are forced to endure until you can no longer endure. And then, the discomfort does not only turn outward, it turns back on yourself. Carl Jung once said, "Man needs difficulties. They are necessary for health." Facing your own boundaries is also a necessary kind of difficulty. Not to make others uncomfortable, but to stop making life difficult for yourself. Time boundaries are not a rejection of people. They are a respect for your own rhythm. The solution here does not need to be extreme. You do not need to bluntly send someone out of your house. What matters more is proactively setting a time frame from the beginning. A simple, gentle statement before the meeting starts, is often far easier than trying to find a way to end it once you are already exhausted. When you say clearly, "I only have about an hour," you are doing nothing wrong. You are giving both sides an end point. The other person knows when to prepare to leave, and you do not have to sit there in a tense state of waiting. You do not have to perform. You do not have to endure. You do not have to blame yourself. What matters most is this: do not wait until you are irritated to try to end things. Once you have crossed your threshold, every word you say is more likely to carry discomfort, and you will return to the old loop, feeling irritated, while also feeling that you were not nice. Respecting your own time is a very quiet form of self-respect. It does not require grand statements. It does not require long explanations. It only requires clarity and honesty. When you respect your own rhythm, you also give others the opportunity to respect you in the same way. So what does it say about your soul that you do not like having guests, especially those who stay too long? It may say that you are someone who is very aware of boundaries, even if you are not yet used to naming them, that your nervous system needs clarity, and that when clarity is missing, your body will speak for you. Not everyone is sensitive to time in this way, but if you are, learning to set a frame does not make you cold. It simply helps you remain kind for longer, without paying the price of depletion. And sometimes, the kindest thing you can do is not to keep the door open a little longer, but to know when to close it, out of respect for yourself. If you have stayed with us through these 6 signs, you may already be realizing something. The feeling of not wanting to host guests is far more complex than you once thought. But this is still not the whole picture. Looking deeper, Carl Jung suggested that there are even more subtle layers, where silence, selectivity, and withdrawal carry a very different meaning of maturity. In the next part, we will explore 3 deeper signs, no longer about fatigue or irritation, but about the quiet transformation of the soul. And if you are still here, perhaps you are ready to see yourself at an even deeper level. Number 7. Silence is a vital need for you. There are people who do not need more of anything. They only need less noise. And at some point, you realize that what you need is not another conversation, another relationship, another appointment. What you need, very simply yet also very difficult to say out loud, is less, so that your mind and body can return to their original state before they were stretched for too long. This feeling often becomes clearest after guests leave. The door closes, the space settles, and instead of turning on music, the TV, or looking for something else to fill the gap, you just want quiet. To do nothing more, to take in nothing more, not because you are empty, but because you are already full of sound, full of interaction, full of presence. You may sit still for a long time, or lie down, or move around the house without purpose. No need for entertainment, no need for content, no need for stimulation, just the absence of noise. And in that quiet space, a very particular feeling begins to emerge, as if you are slowly returning to yourself. This is difficult to explain to others. From the outside, silence is often misunderstood as sadness, loneliness, or disconnection. But for you, silence does not carry a negative tone. It is not an emptiness that needs to be filled. It is a necessary space that allows you to exist in your natural rhythm. Carl Jung believed that human beings cannot come into contact with their true self while being constantly covered by noise. He wrote, "The self cannot be reached by noise, but by silence." Silence, in Jung's view, is not a withdrawal from life, but the condition that allows inner life to be heard. When silence is lacking, people gradually lose contact with themselves. Not all at once, but very slowly. You still work, you still communicate, you still react. But those reactions become increasingly automatic. You answer without feeling. You smile without touching anything inside. You are present, but no longer truly there. And only when you are quiet do you realize how far you have drifted from yourself. Jung warned that when people live too long in outward orientation, with too much stimulation and too much outside, the inner center gradually becomes obscured. He wrote, "Without silence, the soul loses its center. For people like you, Silence is not a luxury. It is the condition that keeps that center from slipping out of place. You can feel this clearly in your body. When you do not have enough silence for a long time, you become more irritable, more tired, less patient, more prone to feeling that something is off. But when you have a quiet space, even just one uninterrupted evening, one silent morning, you soften, you become clearer, lighter, as if the scattered pieces within you begin to return to where they belong. Think of water. When it is constantly stirred, it reflects nothing. All images are distorted. But when the water is still, even a little light makes everything visible. Your mind works the same way, and is sting the same. In start 4. Silence does not create anything new. It simply allows what is already there to be seen. And perhaps this is why you do not like having guests too often. Not because you dislike people, but because every prolonged presence takes away a portion of the silence you need to stay balanced. You can give, but you also need to recharge. And for you, recharging does not come from interaction. It comes from quiet. Have you noticed that when you are quiet, you no longer feel the need to be someone? You do not need a role. You do not need to react. You do not need to explain. You are simply yourself. And that feeling, very simple, yet very rare in a world that constantly demands your presence, your response, your connection. Jung believed that the true self only appears when a person is no longer pulled by external stimulation. He wrote, "One does not discover oneself in noise, but in stillness. Silence does not take you away from life. It brings you back to the starting point, where you can move forward without losing yourself." Do you feel that you come back when you are quiet, not returning to a role, but returning to a familiar, deeply personal, hard-to-describe sense that you are in the right place? If so, then silence may not be a preference, but a vital need for you. The problem is that in modern life, silence often has to be asked for, asked of work, asked of family, asked of relationships. And when you have to ask too much, you begin to see silence as something selfish or luxurious. But for people like you, it is not something to be requested when there is spare time. It is something that must be actively protected. The solution is not to confront the world, not to cut off all connections, but to deliberately preserve fixed moments of quiet in your day, non-negotiable, not something you wait for until you are depleted. It could be an early morning, a quiet evening, an hour before sleep, a weekend day without hosting anyone. These quiet spaces do not have to be long. They just have to be consistent. Most importantly, do not turn them into something that requires permission. You do not need to explain why you need quiet. You do not need to prove that you deserve silence. When you treat silence as a basic need, you will begin to organize your life around it, instead of trying to squeeze it into whatever gaps remain. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." For many people, that path runs through action, achievement, and connection. For you, it may very well run through silence, not because you are avoiding life, but because it is the only way for you to remain whole in a world full of noise. So what does it say, at the deepest level, about your soul that you do not like having guests? It may say that you are someone who needs silence to live in rhythm. That constant presence pulls you away from your center, and that when you choose silence, you are not withdrawing from life, but preserving your capacity to truly be present in it. Loving silence is not an escape from life. It is how you keep yourself from being swept away, how you continue to hear the voice within, and how each time you open the door and step into the world becomes a conscious choice rather than an exhausted reflex. Number 8. You are in a phase where your soul needs to be kept private. The deeper you go into selecting your relationships, the more clearly you become aware of your boundaries. The more you begin to notice something quite strange. You no longer want to talk much about yourself, not because you have become more closed off, not because you have lost trust in others, but because inside you, something is happening very quietly, very delicately, and you do not want it to be touched too soon. At this stage, having guests over is no longer just a matter of social interaction. It feels as though someone is stepping into an inner space You are trying carefully to keep calm and undisturbed. You can still converse. You still answer general questions. You still smile and remain polite. But when the conversation starts to go deeper, when someone asks more carefully about your emotions, about recent changes, about what you are thinking but have not yet said, you begin to slow down. Not because you lack an answer, but because you are not yet ready to bring that answer out into the open. There is a very clear shift in how you show up. You are no longer interested in sharing personal stories. Things you once spoke about quite naturally now feel unnecessary to say, not because you are hiding them, but because you feel they do not yet need to be heard by anyone. They need to remain still a little longer. Inside you, you begin to avoid questions that feel too personal, not by refusing outright, but by redirecting, answering briefly, or smiling, and letting it pass. There are moments when you feel uncomfortable when someone asks too closely, even if they are family, longtime acquaintances, or well-intentioned people. And that discomfort often leads you to question yourself. Am I being too sensitive? But if you listen more carefully, you will notice that this feeling does not come from fear. It comes from a very instinctive form of protection. What is especially striking is that you feel relieved when you do not have to explain what you are going through. There is a very tangible lightness when the conversation stays on the surface, when no one tries to understand too deeply, no one tries to dig further. In those moments, you do not feel empty. On the contrary, you feel that you can breathe, and somewhere inside you, a very honest feeling arises. I am not ready to say it yet. Quote, "The dominant emotion here is not fear, nor is it avoidance. It is not yet ripe, like a thought still forming, an emotion not yet named, a change without a clear shape. You can sense it, but you know that if you speak too soon, it will be distorted, misunderstood, or forced into frameworks that do not belong to it." Carl Jung believed that the human psyche does not operate according to social demands, but according to its own distinct rhythm. He wrote, "The psyche has its own rhythm, and it cannot be forced into premature consciousness." The unconscious understands very clearly when a psychological content is not yet safe to bring into the light. When an emotion, an awareness, or an inner shift is still in the process of forming, being questioned too early, observed too closely, or analyzed too intensely, will cause it to react by withdrawing, not to avoid, but to protect itself. Keeping things private, in this case, is not avoidance. It is a phase of inner preservation, a way for the soul to have enough space to complete itself before stepping outward. Jung repeatedly emphasized that not everything within a person needs to be brought into consciousness immediately. Some parts need time to remain in the dark, not because they are bad, but because they need to be nurtured. You can picture this clearly through a simple image, like a seed that has just begun to sprout. If you dig it up to check whether it has grown yet, it will die. Not because the soil is wrong, not because the light is harmful, but because the timing is not right. Your soul works the same way. Some things are forming but do not yet have a clear shape. Hosting guests, talking, being observed, being questioned, is like light arriving too early. In phases like this, your home is no longer just a place to rest. It becomes a nursery, a space where inner changes are allowed to exist without interference. And that is why you do not like having guests over right now. Not because you do not value anyone, but because you are trying to keep a very tender part of yourself undisturbed. Are you being quiet, not because you have nothing to say, but because you do not yet want to say it? Do you feel lighter when no one probes deeply into your inner life? And are you in a phase where you would rather keep things calm than share enough just to meet other people's expectations? If you see yourself in these questions, you may be going through a very important phase, a phase in which growth does not happen through action, but through inner fermentation. And in that phase, reducing visits, narrowing social contact, is not a sign of withdrawal, but a sign of listening. The solution here is not to cut off all relationships, nor to build rigid walls. What you need first is to allow yourself not to answer every question. You do not owe anyone your entire inner life. Not wanting to speak yet does not mean you are being deceptive. It simply means you are being honest with your current state. Reducing visits during a period of inner instability is not selfish. It is a form of self-care. Not forcing yourself to be open to meet social norms is also a way of respecting your own process. There is no universal standard for inner readiness. Each person has their own rhythm. Most importantly, you need to recognize one thing clearly. Keeping things private is not the same as being deceptive. You are not hiding to manipulate. You are not silent to control. You are silent because you know that some things need to remain undisturbed in order to mature properly. Not everyone has the right to enter every phase of your life, and sometimes, closing the door is not a rejection of others, but a sign that you are respecting your own process of growth. When the soul is ripe enough, it will find its own way to speak. Until then, the quiet you are preserving is not an emptiness, but the necessary ground for you to become the next version of yourself. Number 9. You are entering a phase of fewer people, but the right ones. People often believe that someone who lives well and lives kindly will always be willing to open their door to guests, that the more crowded the house, the wider the relationships, the richer life must be, that the more people who come and go, the more it proves you are loved and connected. But at some point, you begin to realize that you no longer want to welcome guests just to make the house feel lively. You no longer feel interested in meetings that happen out of courtesy. You do not dislike anyone. You remain polite and continue to value your relationships. It is just that you now only feel comfortable with very few people, and that is precisely what makes you start to wonder, are you withdrawing, or are you truly changing? This feeling does not appear suddenly. It arrives very slowly, almost unnoticed. You begin to realize that you no longer have the energy for long, purely social conversations, not because the topics are heavy, but because they no longer feel necessary. Familiar questions, repeated subjects, habitual check-ins, all of it is still fine, but it no longer touches you the way it used to. You still respond, but inside, the sense of full engagement is no longer there. You notice that you only want to spend time with people who truly understand your rhythm of life, people who do not require you to explain yourself too much, who do not need you to translate your emotions into the right words. With them, you can be silent without feeling awkward. You can say little and still feel complete. And strangely enough, even though you meet less often, you do not feel deprived. On the contrary, you feel lighter. By contrast, when you have to host many people, even without doing anything demanding, you feel tired. Not physical tiredness, but the exhaustion that comes from having to maintain constant presence. To listen, to respond, to keep the flow going. And when the visit ends, you do not feel happy because the house had guests, but simply feel the need to be left in peace. That feeling confuses you, because you were not like this before, or at least you did not notice it before. Here, a very clear sensation emerges, fewer, but deeper. You no longer need many meetings to feel alive. You need meetings that do not require you to leave yourself behind. And once you begin to realize this, having guests over is no longer an automatic pleasure. It becomes a question of suitability. Carl Jung believed that the deeper a person moves into the process of individuation, the less compatible they become with generic, mass relationships. He wrote, "Individuation does not isolate, but it reduces what is superfluous. Individuation does not isolate a person, it reduces what is unnecessary." On an unconscious level, this happens as a natural filtering process. You do not sit down and decide who should stay and who should leave. You simply feel a very clear difference in your body and emotions. Some people leave you feeling fuller, others leave you feeling drained, and your unconscious begins to prioritize nourishing connections over those that exist only out of habit or obligation. Jung believed that the unconscious always guides a person toward wholeness. When you are involved in too many relationships that do not nourish you, that sense of wholeness becomes scattered. And at a certain stage, the psyche adjusts itself by narrowing, not to isolate, but to focus. You can understand this easily through an everyday example. It is like when your taste changes. There are foods you once enjoyed greatly, but now they no longer suit you. Not because they are bad, but because your body no longer needs that level of seasoning. Your soul works the same way. It does not need many people. It needs the right ones. And when your taste changes, you do not eat less out of fear. Similarly, when you no longer want to host guests just to make the house feel lively, it is very possible that you are not withdrawing, you are selecting. And this selection does not come from closing yourself off, but from maturity. Do you find that you are truly yourself with only a few people? Do you feel tired when hosting guests, yet feel light when you are with a very specific few? And are you afraid that you are becoming fewer, when in reality, you are becoming more, right? This fear is very common. Society often equates quantity with value. Many relationships are seen as good. Few relationships are easily misunderstood as loneliness. But Jung saw it differently. He believed that the closer people move toward their true self, the less they can maintain connections that do not reflect who they are, not because they are superior, but because they are no longer compatible. The solution here is not to cut everything off, nor is it to hold on to everything. What matters is that you stop forcing yourself to maintain every relationship simply because of the past. You allow yourself to reduce the number of visits, not because you are selfish, but because you are managing your energy more consciously. Reducing visits does not mean reducing kindness. It simply means increasing the quality of connection. You spend time with people who do not require you to tense up, people who do not take away your sense of calm. And you respect the natural selection of your emotions, rather than forcing yourself to be equally available to everyone. Equally important is accepting an uncomfortable truth. Not everyone will walk with you into this stage. Some relationships fit you perfectly in an earlier phase. But when your rhythm of life, emotional rhythm, and inner rhythm change, that compatibility fades. This does not make anyone wrong. It simply shows that you are on a different stretch of the path. When the soul matures, it does not expand further. It becomes more precise. Fewer people are not a loss. Fewer people are a sign that you have stopped living scattered. And at this stage, your dislike of having guests over may not signal distance, but clarity. Clarity about who you are, what you need, and that you are no longer willing to trade your sense of peace to maintain connections that no longer nourish you. This is not closing yourself off from the world. It is choosing to step into the world alongside those who truly move at the same rhythm as you. If you recognize yourself somewhere in this sign, please share in the comments. It might be the moment you realized you are only truly comfortable with very few people. Or the moment you understood that becoming fewer is not loneliness, but discernment, because your story may be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. We are often taught that opening the door is a good thing, that being friendly is the measure of a likable person. But through this journey, perhaps you have come to realize that closing the door is not always a rejection, and silence is not always distance. Sometimes, it is simply the way the soul preserves its own wholeness. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Perhaps your dislike of having guests does not speak of coldness or unapproachability, but of something deeper, that you are listening to yourself, and that you have the courage to honor what you hear. You do not need to explain too much. You do not need to force yourself to fit every mold. Maturity, at times, is simply knowing what you need and daring to slow down a little so you do not lose your true self. If this content has given you a new perspective, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We will continue to walk with you into the more subtle realms of psychology and the journey of returning to yourself. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to seeing you in the next videos.